Given that selecting and manipulating the various subobject elements of a UVW mesh lies at the heart of the Unwrap UVW modifier's workflow, it really is important that we become familiar right from the get-go with the major selection features that the modifier offers to us. Now, the good news for an artist who has done any kind of polygon modelling in 3ds Max is that these controls and the way in which they work will have a very familiar feel. To make a start then, let's, in the viewport, go ahead and select our robot hand, and then jump into the Command Panel's Modify tab. Straight away, we can see how things are going to be working, in that we are now able to access subobject modes such as Vertex, Edge, and Polygon. Now, the element control does behave a little differently than in the modelling tools, in that we can only access it once one of the other subobject modes has been enabled. This is due to the fact that Element is, in actuality, a modifier for each of the other subobject modes. To demonstrate, let's jump into Polygon subobject mode, which gives us the ability, of course, to now select individual polygons on the UVW mesh. The usual modifier keys apply here, so I can hold down Ctrl to add to a selection, and then Alt to remove from it whenever I need. If I go ahead and enable the element toggle at this point, however, you can see that my next click selects not just a single polygon on the mesh, but rather the entire polygon subobject element. In fact, at this point, I can easily switch between the various subobject types, and with each click, my element selection very nicely updates accordingly. We can also use the Modify Selection tools to alter selection behavior if we like. If I just turn off the element toggle, and then left click to select a single polygon, I can now use the Grow and Shrink buttons to either increase or decrease any selection I make at any of the available subobject levels, making it quick and easier to walk Max through to the selection point that I want. We also, at edge level, have the ability to use the Loop and Ring tools, again making it really easy for those familiar with modelling in Max to create any kind of UV selection set that is needed. Now, as powerful as the selection tools we have looked at here may be, for UVW mapping work it is the next set of controls, those found in the Select By section, that are, in my honest opinion, and in the context of the way in which I work, the more powerful options to use. For instance, if I hit the P key to switch to a perspective view, and then in Polygon subobject mode, click and drag to select the lower half of the hand here, you can see, as I use the Alt and middle mouse buttons to orbit around, that we have indeed selected all of the polygons encompassed by the marquee operation. However, if I come back around to the front, turn on the Ignore Back Facing option, and then seemingly make that same selection all over again, you can see that what we get this time is a very different selection result, with all of the polygons facing away from the viewport camera, at the time of selection of course, now being ignored. Another tool here that works only in Edge subobject mode is point-to-point edge selection. This, when engaged, if I just turn Ignore Back Facing off, and then left click in the viewport to clear my selection, gives us the ability to quickly jump from vertex to vertex in order to plot out an edge selection route for ourselves. Right-clicking once we are done will dismiss the rubber band, and right-clicking a second time will put us back into standard work mode. So as not to be outdone, Polygon mode also has tools that have been designed exclusively for it, such as the Select by Planar Angle toggle. When active, this option lets us select contiguous coplanar polygons with just a single click of the mouse. We use the numeric field here to specify, in angles, the threshold value at which polygons are to be considered coplanar. So let's set something like a value of 10 here, and then click a single polygon. Now, any contiguous or connected polygons whose angles fall within this threshold value get selected as well. We also have a couple of powerful selection options in the form of these Select by Material ID and Select by Smoothing Group controls. These are selection tools that require a little more detailed work to have been carried out on the mesh, perhaps in the modelling stages, in order for them to work well for us here. If we, or the modelling department in our studio, have set up material IDs and or smoothing groups for the geometry though, these tools can certainly help us make mapping selections very quickly. They both work in pretty much the same way, in that rather than being a toggle, they are a single click selector. In fact, we can demonstrate this by using the smoothing groups control. Let's say I need to select all of the polygons found inside smoothing group 1 here. Well, all I need to do is simply set that as the value, click the select button, and we're done. If I need smoothing groups 2 or 3, it's as easy as changing the number and then clicking the button. And as I say, the Material ID option works in exactly the same way. Now before we close out this exercise, one thing we vitally need to grasp, hence my leaving it until the very end, is the fact that when working inside the Unwrap UVW modifier, selecting and manipulating the various subobject elements we have access to here does not in any way alter or affect the actual mesh data of our 3D model. The vertex, edge and polygon elements that we've been selecting here are simply a visual representation of the mapping coordinates that have been applied. For anyone working with 3D geometry, of course, the best way to represent, work with, and manipulate those mapping coordinates is by means of the same base elements used in the modelling process itself, namely vertices, edges, and polygons. In fact, you can readily see that with any of the UVW polygons selected, none of our standard geometry transform tools are available. This is because they don't in any way recognize the selection that we have made. If, on the other hand, we quickly open up the UVW editor, we see that in here we can both select and manipulate the UVW mesh. As the viewport clearly shows though, manipulation of these polygons makes no difference at all to the configuration of our actual mesh object. With the selection tools taken care of then, let's move on to our next exercise where we will take a look at the tools, other than the UV editor that is, made available from inside the Edit UVs rollout.